What if the fate of an ancient spiritual tradition and the future of an entire people depended on a single, fiercely contested question? Who gets to choose the next Dalai Lama? In the shadow of the Himalayas, a centuries-old sacred search is colliding with one of the world's most powerful governments. Today, as the 14th Dalai Lama enters his 10th decade of life, the stakes have never been higher, and the reverberations of this question ripple far beyond the snowy plateaus of Tibet, touching the hearts and minds of millions across continents. To understand why this battle over reincarnation is shaking the foundations of global politics, spiritual life, and even the world order itself, let us journey back through centuries of myth, intrigue, and cultural resilience. The title of Dalai Lama finds its roots in the 14th century, a time when Tibet was a patchwork of competing kingdoms and spiritual schools. The Dalai Lama is believed by Tibetans to be the living incarnation of Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva of compassion, a being who selflessly returns life after life to guide and protect the Tibetan people. Each new Dalai Lama is found not through simple inheritance or election, but through a mysterious, rigorous process involving prophecies, sacred rituals, dreams, and the careful observation of omens by learned monks. The search for a new Dalai Lama is an undertaking steeped in tradition and secrecy. When a Dalai Lama passes away, high lamas and officials embark on a journey, sometimes across vast mountains and treacherous terrain, to seek signs indicating the whereabouts of the next reincarnation. This process may include interpreting visions in sacred lakes, consulting oracles, and even seeking guidance from the dreams of revered lamas. Once a likely child is found, often showing uncanny traits or knowledge connected to the previous Dalai Lama, he is tested with personal objects, some belonging to the previous Dalai Lama, to see if he recognizes them intuitively. Only when the signs align is the new Dalai Lama recognized and enthroned. Yet history teaches us that this process has rarely been free from outside interference. In the 18th century, the Qing dynasty, under the Qianlong Emperor, introduced the so-called Golden Urn system in the year 1792. Ostensibly, this was meant to ensure fairness and eliminate corruption in the selection of high-ranking lamas, including the Dalai Lama and Panchen Lama. In reality, however, the urn was a gilded cage, a tool of imperial control intended to bring the unpredictable flame of Tibetan Buddhism under Beijing's thumb. Professor Elliot Sperling of Indiana University has famously remarked, "The golden urn is less a religious tool than a political device, designed to ensure that the right candidate is chosen, one loyal to the ruling power." Fast forward to the early 20th century. In the year 1913, the 13th Dalai Lama declared Tibet's independence in the wake of the Qing dynasty's collapse. For a brief period, Tibet functioned as a de facto independent state, flying its own flag and conducting its own foreign policy. But this fragile autonomy was short-lived. In the year 1950, the People's Liberation Army invaded, claiming to liberate Tibet from feudalism and imperialism. Just 9 years later, after a failed uprising, the 14th Dalai Lama was forced to flee across the Himalayas with a small group of followers, eventually finding refuge in India. There, in the hill town of Dharamshala, he established the Central Tibetan Administration, often called the Tibetan Government in Exile, and became a symbol of non-violent resistance. Meanwhile, Beijing branded him a dangerous separatist. As decades passed, China's grip on the region only tightened. Since the year 2010, more than 150 Tibetans have self-immolated, setting themselves on fire in desperate protest against policies that restrict language, culture, and religious practice. United Nations human rights experts have repeatedly sounded the alarm on shrinking freedoms. In a landmark report from the year 2023, the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights expressed deep concern over forced disappearances, mass surveillance, and the erasure of Tibetan language and customs. According to Dr. Thierry Dodin, director of the Tibet Information Network, the Chinese Communist Party's control over Tibetan Buddhism is tightening, leaving little space for religious autonomy. The heart of Tibetan spiritual life is being suffocated by policies aiming to reshape it in the party's image. This struggle is now approaching a dramatic climax. The Dalai Lama, who recently celebrated his 90th birthday, has stated unequivocally that the Chinese government will have no role in his reincarnation. Instead, he insists, the next Dalai Lama must be found according to authentic Tibetan tradition, a stance that resonates powerfully with Tibetans in exile and supporters worldwide. In April of the year 2025, the European Parliament passed a resolution strongly condemning China's interference, and the United States State Department issued a travel advisory for Tibet in May, citing increased surveillance and religious repression. Additionally, the Central Tibetan Administration reported a 30% increase in asylum applications from Tibetans throughout the year 2024, reflecting the mounting desperation among ordinary people. But Beijing's response has been swift, uncompromising, and multifaceted. The Chinese ambassador to India, Zhu Feixiong, recently declared, "The conferment of religious status and titles is the prerogative of the central government of China. The reincarnation and succession of the Dalai Lama is inherently an internal affair of China." A leaked government directive from March of the year 2025 outlines a sweeping 5-year plan to sinicize Tibetan Buddhism, integrating all religious activities under Communist Party oversight, rewriting doctrines to emphasize loyalty to the state, and eradicating any hint of separatist sentiment. The Panchen Lama controversy, a chilling precedent, still casts a long shadow over these developments. For those unfamiliar, in the year 1995, the Dalai Lama recognized a 6-year-old boy as the 11th Panchen Lama, the second highest figure in Tibetan Buddhism. Within days, Chinese authorities abducted the boy and his family, and their whereabouts remain unknown to this day. Instead, Beijing installed its own Panchen Lama, Gyaltsen Norbu, whose legitimacy has been widely rejected by Tibetans. As John Jones of Human Rights Watch notes, the enforced disappearance of the Panchen Lama remains a stain on China's human rights record and a warning of what could happen if Beijing is allowed to control the Dalai Lama's succession. Today, two powerful forces are on a collision course. On one side stands the Tibetan people, fiercely protective of their spiritual traditions and cultural identity, rallying behind the Dalai Lama's vision of a free, compassionate society. On the other side stands the centralized state apparatus, wielding immense economic and military power, determined to bend every institution, spiritual or secular, to its will. The outcome of this struggle will not only determine the fate of Tibetan Buddhism, but also set a precedent for religious freedom, minority rights, and cultural self-determination across the world. So what futures lie ahead? Let us explore, in depth, the 3 most likely scenarios and their profound implications. The first scenario is that of dual succession. In this outcome, 2 rival Dalai Lamas would emerge. One chosen by Tibetan tradition, supported by the diaspora and much of the Buddhist world, and another handpicked by Beijing, enthroned in Lhasa under heavy security and state sponsorship. This would fracture the Tibetan community, both at home and abroad. Monasteries might split their loyalties. Pilgrims could face impossible choices. The international Buddhist community, which numbers in the tens of millions across Asia, Europe, and North America, could find itself divided. Dr. Tenzin Dorji, former commissioner of the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom, warns, "A forced reincarnation will only deepen wounds and erode trust, not just inside Tibet, but among Buddhist communities worldwide, and it risks turning a sacred tradition into a political farce." Such a split would also give China a propaganda victory, allowing officials to claim international legitimacy for their chosen Dalai Lama, while painting the traditionalist camp as fringe, seditious, or foreign-influenced. State-controlled media could amplify the message that Tibet's spiritual future is secure under Beijing's guidance, while quietly suppressing dissent and intimidating those who resist. Meanwhile, the traditional Dalai Lama, likely living in exile, perhaps in India or elsewhere, could become a rallying point for resistance, but would face enormous challenges in uniting a fragmented community and maintaining global attention as years pass. The second scenario is even more radical. The Dalai Lama could refuse to reincarnate altogether, breaking with centuries of tradition. He has hinted at this possibility in interviews, suggesting that if Tibetans themselves lose faith in the institution, the lineage could end with him. This would deny Beijing the chance to install a puppet, but would also leave a vacuum at the heart of Tibetan Buddhism. Could the Gaden Phodrang Trust, now more active than ever in mapping and documenting endangered monasteries and cultural sites, provide enough unity to hold the Tibetan people together? The trust has already made significant strides, creating digital archives of centuries-old manuscripts and organizing international conferences on Tibetan culture. However, leadership in exile is never easy, and the risk of fragmentation is real. Without a universally recognized spiritual leader, different schools and regions could drift apart, and the sense of shared destiny that has sustained Tibet through centuries of upheaval might fade. Yet, this scenario also has potential. By focusing on collective leadership and strengthening institutions, Tibetans could model a new form of resilience, one less dependent on a single charismatic figure and more rooted in grassroots participation. The Central Tibetan Administration, for example, has expanded its education, health, and human rights programs, serving thousands of refugees and exiles. In the words of Dr. Thierry Dodin, the challenge is to transform loss into renewal, to ensure that Tibetan culture survives not just in memory, but in practice, for generations to come. The third, and perhaps most audacious scenario, is the identification of the next Dalai Lama outside of Tibet, perhaps in India, Nepal, or even among the Tibetan diaspora in the West. Such a move would directly defy Beijing's authority, sparking international headlines and likely galvanizing stronger support for Tibetan autonomy. In recent years, the Central Tibetan Administration has forged close ties with governments and civil society organizations around the world, lobbying for religious freedom and cultural preservation. If the next Dalai Lama were found in exile, he could become a global symbol of resistance, drawing on the power of digital media to reach millions. Robert Thurman, professor of Indo-Tibetan Buddhist Studies at Columbia University and a close confidant of the Dalai Lama, observes, "The true legitimacy of the Dalai Lama's reincarnation rests with Tibetan Buddhists, not with governments. Any attempt to impose a leader from outside the tradition will ultimately fail in the eyes of the faithful." However, this scenario carries risks as well. Beijing would almost certainly denounce the exiled Dalai Lama as illegitimate, intensify crackdowns inside Tibet, and use its economic leverage to pressure countries hosting Tibetan exiles. The Chinese government has already demonstrated its capacity to retaliate against foreign governments that support Tibetan causes, from restricting trade partnerships to canceling diplomatic visits. The international community would need to weigh its commitment to human rights against the realities of geopolitical and economic interests. But let us not underestimate the power of global solidarity. In April of the year 2025, the European Parliament passed a resolution condemning China's interference in Tibetan religious affairs, calling for the protection of the right to choose religious leaders free from state coercion. The United States, Australia, Japan, and many European nations have issued statements of support. Additionally, in May of the same year, the United States State Department issued a travel advisory for Tibet, highlighting tighter surveillance, restrictions on religious gatherings, and the proliferation of facial recognition cameras in public and sacred spaces alike. These moves reflect growing international awareness of the stakes involved. Within Tibet, the struggle is deeply personal. More than 150 Tibetans have self-immolated since the year 2010, a harrowing testament to the depth of despair and the burning desire for change. These acts, while tragic, have become a rallying cry for the movement, drawing attention from human rights organizations and prompting urgent debates in the United Nations and other international bodies. The Central Tibetan Administration has reported a 30% surge in asylum applications during the year 2024, as more young Tibetans risk everything to escape repression and preserve their culture abroad. So why should you care? What can we actually learn from this high-stakes drama unfolding in one of the world's most remote regions? The battle over the Dalai Lama's reincarnation is not just a Tibetan story. It is a window into the universal struggle for cultural self-determination under rising authoritarianism. A struggle playing out in Hong Kong, Xinjiang, Crimea, and countless other regions where minority cultures face erasure. It is about what happens when ancient tradition collides with the machinery of the modern surveillance state. For anyone fascinated by global politics, religion, or the evolving role of technology, Tibet is a case study in the 21st century's defining conflicts. The fight to preserve Tibetan Buddhist identity is unfolding in real time, shaped by data collection, digital propaganda, and ever-tightening control policies. The leaked 5-year plan to Sinicize Tibetan Buddhism, revealed in March of the year 2025, is just one example of how the Chinese Communist Party is using every tool, old and new, to rewrite spiritual practice. Surveillance cameras now watch over monasteries, police monitor religious gatherings, and state-sponsored apps track the movements, messages, and even the prayers of Tibetans. The Gaiden Phodrang Trust, recognizing the threat posed not just to people but to knowledge itself, has launched an ambitious project to digitally map and document every monastery, temple, and stupa in Tibet. Volunteers, often risking arrest, upload photographs and stories to secret servers outside China, creating a living archive for future generations. Meanwhile, exiled Tibetans are using social media to share stories, organize protests, and connect with supporters worldwide. In an age where information is both weapon and shield, the digital battlefield has become as important as the physical. Furthermore, the economic dimensions of the struggle cannot be ignored. The Dalai Lama's income, estimated at $2 million annually from speaking engagements and book royalties, has been channeled into supporting refugee communities, funding schools, and preserving cultural heritage. Meanwhile, China has invested billions in infrastructure projects across Tibet, building highways, railways, and hydroelectric dams. While these projects have brought some material benefits, they have also accelerated Han Chinese migration, diluted Tibetan culture, and, critics argue, turned Lhasa into a showcase city devoid of its spiritual soul. Let us also consider the human cost. The disappearance of the Panchen Lama, recognized by the Dalai Lama in the year 1995, remains one of the world's most notorious cases of enforced disappearance. This boy, who would now be 36 years old, has not been seen in public for nearly 3 decades. His story is a silent but powerful reminder of the stakes involved, and a warning to those who think spiritual succession can be engineered by force. As Kate Saunders from the International Campaign for Tibet puts it, China's actions in Tibet are aimed at eradicating Tibetan identity and culture. The world must not look away. This is not just about Tibet. Viewing these events with clear eyes can help us recognize similar patterns elsewhere. When does cultural preservation become political resistance? How do digital tools empower or endanger dissidents? What role should the international community play when autonomy and identity are at risk? These are questions that resonate from the Andes to the Arctic, from the plains of Africa to the streets of Europe. And now, the answer to our original question: will Tibetan tradition prevail, or will Beijing impose its will? The truth is, the struggle is far from over. Beijing's grip is tightening, but Tibetan resilience is also growing. The Dalai Lama, now in his 90s, has set in motion systems like the Gaiden Phodrang Trust and digital archives to ensure Tibetan voices are not silenced and their heritage is not erased. Every year, more Tibetans risk everything to seek asylum, refusing to surrender their language, faith, and identity. Here is a secret fact. The Panchen Lama, recognized by the Dalai Lama, who disappeared as a child in the mid-1990s, would now be 36 years old. His fate still shrouded in mystery. His absence is not just a personal tragedy, but a symbol of the ongoing battle for spiritual succession, cultural survival, and the right to self-determination. What happens in Tibet in the coming years will influence global debates about religious freedom, surveillance, and the rights of peoples to determine their own destiny. The question of who gets to choose the next Dalai Lama is, in the end, about much more than a single leader or a single tradition. It is about whether the world will stand up for those who refuse to be erased. So, keep watching, keep questioning. Dive deeper into the stories that reveal the hidden battles shaping our world. If you want more insights into the forces remaking history, hit subscribe, ring the bell, and join the conversation below. Your perspective matters, and together, we can shed light on voices that refuse to be silenced. The